Now I was just Margaret Sullivan, a 64-year-old woman with a criminal record, no longer the respected nursing home administrator who had dedicated 40 years to caring for the elderly, no longer the woman who remembered every resident's favorite dessert and their grandchildren's names, just an ex-convict who had supposedly stolen from the very people she'd sworn to protect. 7 years. That's how long I spent in federal prison for Medicare fraud and financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. 7 years of living in an 8x10 cell, eating food that tasted like cardboard, and listening to the clanging of metal doors that never stopped echoing in my mind. 7 years of my daughter refusing to bring my grandchildren to visit because she was too ashamed. 7 years of knowing that somewhere out there, my best friend was living in a mansion built on lies while I rotted behind bars. The day I walked out of FCI Danbury, the cold Connecticut air hit my face like a slap. I was 64 years old with nothing but the clothes on my back and $217 in gate money. My husband had divorced me 3 years into my sentence. My daughter had changed her phone number. The home I'd spent 30 years paying for had been seized by the government to pay restitution to my supposed victims. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a run-down section of Philadelphia, funded by what little remained in my retirement account after the lawyers took their share. I got a job stocking shelves at a discount grocery store for $11 an hour. My coworkers were mostly kids in their 20s who called me Miss Maggie and had no idea that I used to manage a 100-bed facility and oversee a staff of 60. Every day felt the same. Wake up at 5, work until 2, come home to an empty apartment, eat dinner alone, go to bed, repeat. The loneliness was worse than prison. At least in prison, I had my cellmate, Rosa, who believed I was innocent. Out here, I was truly alone. But every Sunday, without fail, I took the bus to Fairmount Park. There was a memorial garden there, dedicated to elderly victims of care facility abuse. 17 bronze plaques, each bearing the name of a person who had died under suspicious circumstances in nursing homes across Pennsylvania. 3 of those names were from my facility. 3 residents who had died during my tenure as administrator, whose families believed I had neglected them while stealing their money. Mr. Harold Chen, who died at 89 from what the coroner called malnutrition and dehydration. Mrs. Patricia Kowalski, who fell and broke her hip, leading to complications that killed her at 76. And Mr. James Morrison, who passed at 92 from what they claimed was medication mismanagement. I brought flowers every week. White roses for Mr. Chen, who loved the rose bushes in our courtyard, yellow carnations for Mrs. Kowalski, who had been a florist, and forget-me-nots for Mr. Morrison, because he'd had Alzheimer's and the irony wasn't lost on me. I would sit on the bench facing their plaques and talk to them, apologizing for failing them even though I knew in my heart I hadn't. I told them about my week, about the new brand of cereal I was stocking, about the weather. Sometimes I cried. Most times I just sat there, feeling the weight of their names pressing down on my chest. It was a cold Sunday in November, 3 months after my release, when everything changed. I was arranging the flowers at Mrs. Kowalski's plaque when I heard footsteps running toward me. Fast, urgent footsteps. I turned around and saw a teenage girl, maybe 16 or 17, with tears streaming down her face. She was wearing a dark blue coat and a backpack, and she was running straight toward me. "Miss Sullivan?" she gasped, stopping a few feet away. Her whole body was shaking. "Miss Margaret Sullivan?" I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. No one had called me by my full name in years. "Yes, who are you?" "My name is Sophie Chen," she said, and my blood ran cold. Chen, Harold Chen's granddaughter. I'd met her once, years ago, when she was just a little girl visiting her grandfather. "I need to talk to you. I need to tell you something I should have said 7 years ago." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. This girl, this teenager, was the granddaughter of one of the men whose death I'd been blamed for. "What do you mean?" I finally managed to whisper. Sophie wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I know what really happened to my grandfather. I know who really killed him, and it wasn't you." The world tilted sideways. I gripped the edge of the bench to steady myself. "What are you talking about?" "It was Dr. Price," she said, her voice breaking. "Dr. Eleanor Price. She was the one who changed his medications. She was the one who falsified the records. I saw her do it. Dr. Eleanor Price, my best friend of 23 years, the woman who had testified against me at trial, swearing under oath that I had systematically diverted funds meant for resident care and cut corners that led to their deaths. The woman who now ran the most prestigious senior living network in Pennsylvania, who lived in a $4 million mansion in Gladwin, who was on the cover of Philadelphia Magazine as Healthcare Hero of the Year. How? I couldn't form a complete sentence. How did you see? I was 10 years old, Sophie said, sitting down heavily on the bench. My mom used to drop me off at Grandpa Harold's room after school because she worked late. I'd do my homework in his room while he napped. One afternoon, I forgot my math book in the activities room, so I went back to get it. She paused, her hands twisting together in her lap. The hallway was empty, but I heard voices in the medication room. The door was cracked open. I looked inside because I thought maybe it was you, Miss Margaret. You always let me help sort the pill boxes. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. But it wasn't you, Sophie continued, her voice barely above a whisper. It was Dr. Price. She was with another woman I didn't recognize. They were switching medications in the bottles, taking pills out of some bottles and putting them in others. Dr. Price was saying something about reducing waste and maximizing profit margins and how Margaret will never notice. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Why didn't you tell anyone? The tears were flowing freely down Sophie's face now. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I was 10. I knew it seemed wrong, but I thought maybe it was something doctors were supposed to do. And then Grandpa got sick so fast. Within 2 weeks, he was gone. My family was devastated. My mom could barely get out of bed. And then the investigation started, I said quietly, the pieces falling into place. Sophie nodded. The FBI came to our house. They showed us documents, financial records. They said you had been stealing from the residents, cutting costs on food and medications to pocket the difference. They showed us Grandpa's medical records that proved he'd been malnourished and given the wrong medications for months. Dr. Price was the one who provided all the evidence. She cried when she talked about you, said she couldn't believe her best friend had done this. I closed my eyes, remembering Eleanor at the trial. The tears rolling down her face as she described how she'd trusted me, how she'd ignored red flags because we were friends. How she'd finally been forced to confront the truth when the bodies started piling up. The jury had eaten it up. I'd looked at my former best friend and seen nothing but betrayal, but I'd thought she genuinely believed I was guilty. I never imagined she was the one who had set me up. I still didn't put it together, Sophie said. I was a kid. I thought maybe what I'd seen was unrelated. Maybe I'd misunderstood. But then when I was 14, I was taking a health class, learning about medication management and elder care, and suddenly I remembered that day. Really remembered it. The way Dr. Price had been switching those pills. The way she'd said your name. Why didn't you come forward then? I asked, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. I tried, Sophie said, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I told my mom. She didn't believe me. She said I was confused, that I was misremembering something from when I was little, that grief does strange things to memory. She said, Dr. Price was a hero who had exposed you and saved other families from the same fate. She told me I was being disrespectful to Grandpa's memory by making up stories. She looked up at me with eyes full of pain. I tried to tell my therapist. She said the same thing, that I was processing childhood trauma in unhealthy ways, that I needed to accept what had happened and move on. I even tried to call the FBI tip line once, but I was so scared, and when the agent asked for my name and age, I hung up. So why now? I asked. Why tell me this now? Because 3 weeks ago, my grandmother died, Sophie said softly. Grandpa Harold's wife. She'd been living in Meadowbrook Estates, one of Dr. Price's facilities, for the past 5 years. And Miss Sullivan, the exact same thing happened. She got sick suddenly. They said she had the wrong medications in her system, but this time, Dr. Price didn't blame an administrator. She blamed a clerical error and gave my mom a $50,000 settlement to keep quiet. My hands were shaking. Eleanor is still doing it. She's built an empire, Sophie said. 15 facilities across Pennsylvania and New Jersey. She gets Medicare payments for premium care, but the residents receive generic medications or sometimes nothing at all. When someone dies, she covers it up with settlements or by blaming low-level staff. She's made hundreds of millions of dollars. I stood up, my legs barely holding me. 7 years. 7 years of my life, stolen. My marriage, destroyed. My relationship with my daughter and grandchildren, shattered. My reputation, ruined. All while Eleanor Price got richer and richer off the backs of vulnerable elderly people. Will you tell someone official? I asked Sophie. The police? The FBI? A lawyer? She nodded, wiping her nose. That's why I came to find you. I'm 17 now, almost an adult. My testimony would matter more. And I'm not scared anymore. My grandmother is dead because I was too afraid to speak up. I can't live with that. Your family will hate you, I warned her. Your mother won't believe you. She'll think you're betraying your grandfather's memory. I know, Sophie said. But Grandpa Harold was a good man. He wouldn't want me to stay silent while other people's grandparents die. He'd want me to do the right thing. I looked at this brave young woman and felt something I hadn't felt in 7 years. Hope. Okay, I said. Let's go to the FBI together. The next 3 months were a whirlwind. Sophie gave her statement to FBI investigators. At first, they were skeptical. A teenage girl claiming to remember something from when she was 10? About a case that had been closed for 7 years? But Sophie was smart. She'd done her homework. She'd contacted former employees of Meadowbrook Estates, Eleanor's flagship facility. 3 of them agreed to talk confidentially about the medication practices they'd witnessed. She'd collected obituaries of elderly residents who had died under suspicious circumstances at Eleanor's facilities over the past 7 years. There were 43 of them. The FBI started digging. They subpoenaed Eleanor's financial records, her facility records, her personal emails. What they found was staggering. Eleanor had created an entire shadow system. On paper, she ordered premium medications and top-tier supplies for her residents. In reality, she substituted them with cheap generics or saline solutions, pocketing the difference. When residents got sick or died as a result, she'd falsify medical records to make it look like natural causes or pre-existing conditions. If families got suspicious, she'd offer settlements funded by a discretionary account that was actually just a fraction of what she'd stolen. But the FBI needed more. They needed proof of what had happened at my facility 7 years ago. They needed to prove that I had been framed. That's when they found the other woman. The one Sophie had seen with Eleanor in the medication room that day. Her name was Linda Martinez, and she'd been a pharmaceutical sales rep who had supplied Eleanor with cheap foreign medications that weren't FDA approved. Linda had kept records of every transaction, stored in a safe deposit box, as insurance in case Eleanor ever tried to throw her under the bus. When the FBI offered Linda immunity in exchange for testimony, she sang like a bird. She confirmed everything. Eleanor had approached her in early 2016, asking for cheaper alternatives to the expensive medications her facility was required to provide. Linda had set up the supply chain. Eleanor had falsified the records. And when the deaths started occurring and state investigators got involved, Eleanor had needed a fall guy. That fall guy was me. Linda testified that Eleanor had specifically targeted me because I was the administrator, the one who signed off on all the orders and records. Eleanor had spent months carefully planting evidence, forging my signature on fake purchase orders, creating fake email accounts in my name, redirecting payments into offshore accounts that appeared to be mine but were actually controlled by her. The brilliance of it was that Eleanor, as the medical director, had access to everything. She could alter medical records, change medication logs, fabricate evidence of neglect, and when she came forward as the whistleblower who had discovered my crimes, she was hailed as a hero while I went to prison. On March 15th, 7 months after Sophie approached me in the Memorial Garden, Eleanor Price was arrested. The charges were extensive: Medicare fraud, wire fraud, elder abuse, manslaughter, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. My conviction was vacated 2 weeks later. The state of Pennsylvania issued a formal apology. I was awarded $1.2 million in compensation for wrongful imprisonment, though no amount of money could give me back those 7 years. But the money wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was the phone call. I received 3 days after the news broke. My daughter, crying so hard she could barely speak. "Mom," she sobbed, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have visited. I should have." "It's okay," I told her, tears streaming down my own face. "It's okay, sweetheart. Can I bring the kids to see you?" she asked. "They ask about you all the time," I told them. "I told them you were working far away, but I want to tell them the truth. I want them to know their grandmother." "Yes," I whispered. "Please." My grandchildren, 8 and 6 years old now, had grown so much. I'd missed birthday parties and school plays and first lost teeth and bedtime stories. But when they ran into my arms calling, "Grandma! Grandma!" I knew we could build something new. Sophie's prediction about her family had been right. Her mother stopped speaking to her. Some relatives called her a traitor, but others, including Harold Chen's brother, reached out to thank her. They said Harold would have been proud of her courage. I hired Sophie as my assistant. With the compensation money, I started a foundation dedicated to protecting elderly residents in care facilities. We trained family members to spot signs of abuse and neglect. We provided free legal services to families who suspected wrongdoing. We pushed for legislation requiring better oversight and harsher penalties for exploitation. Sophie worked with me every day after school and during summers. She was brilliant, passionate, dedicated. She reminded me why I'd gotten into elder care in the first place. Not for the money or the prestige, but because our elderly deserve dignity, respect, and protection. Eleanor Price's trial lasted 6 weeks. I attended every single day, sitting in the gallery with Sophie beside me. Eleanor never once looked at me. When the guilty verdicts were read on all 47 counts, she showed no emotion. She was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. At 62 years old, she'd likely die behind bars. Part of me felt sad for her. We'd been best friends once. We'd started our careers together, supported each other through divorces and sick parents and career challenges. I'd thought I knew her, but somewhere along the way, greed had poisoned her soul. The hardest part was forgiving myself. For not seeing the signs, for trusting her so completely, for not fighting harder to prove my innocence from the beginning. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Rahman, told me that trauma from wrongful imprisonment often mirrors the symptoms of PTSD. The nightmares about cell doors closing, the panic attacks when I heard loud noises, the difficulty trusting anyone, even people who wanted to help me. But slowly, with therapy and medication and the support of my daughter and grandchildren and Sophie, I began to heal. 1 year after Eleanor's conviction, we held a ceremony at the Memorial Garden in Fairmount Park. We added 3 new plaques for the 3 residents from my facility, but these plaques told the truth. They named Eleanor Price as the person responsible for their deaths. They cleared my name. Sophie stood beside me as I placed white roses at Harold Chen's plaque. "Thank you for raising such a brave granddaughter," I said quietly. Sophie squeezed my hand. "Thank you for never giving up," she said. My daughter and grandchildren were there too. My son-in-law, who I'd just met 6 months ago, former employees from my facility who had reached out to apologize for believing the lies, families of Eleanor's victims who had formed their own support group. We weren't a traditional family. We were a family forged by tragedy and trauma and the long, difficult journey toward truth. But we were a family nonetheless. As I looked around at all these faces, people who had been strangers a year ago but who now meant everything to me, I realized something profound. Eleanor had taken 7 years of my life. She'd stolen my reputation, my marriage, my relationship with my daughter. She'd tried to destroy me completely. But she hadn't won, because I was still standing. And more than that, I was helping others stand too. That night, I went home to my new apartment, a 2-bedroom place in a nice neighborhood where my grandchildren could visit and have their own room. I made dinner while my daughter helped the kids with their homework at my kitchen table. Normal, everyday sounds that I'd dreamed about in prison. After they left, I sat on my balcony and watched the Philadelphia skyline light up against the darkening sky. I thought about Harold Chen and Patricia Kowalski and James Morrison. I thought about all the other elderly residents who had died under Eleanor's care. I thought about Sophie, whose courage had saved countless others from the same fate. And I thought about second chances, how rare they are, how precious, how 7 years ago I'd thought my life was over. But here I was, 65 years old, with a purpose and a family and hope for tomorrow. I'm not going to lie and say everything is perfect now. I still have nightmares. I still flinch when I hear doors slam. I still have days when the anger rises up and threatens to consume me, when I think about all those years I'll never get back. But I also have days filled with my grandchildren's laughter. Days working with Sophie to protect vulnerable seniors. Days having coffee with my daughter and talking about everything and nothing. Days that remind me that life, even after injustice, can still be beautiful. The truth did come out, eventually. It took 7 years, but it came out. And while I can't change the past, I can make sure that my pain serves a purpose. Every family we help, every resident we protect, every person we save from what happened to me, that's my revenge against Eleanor Price. Not bitterness, not hatred, but building something good from the ashes of what she destroyed. That's how I choose to live now. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. Not as an ex-convict, but as an advocate. Not as the woman who lost everything, but as the woman who found what truly matters. And every Sunday, I still visit that memorial garden. But now I don't go alone. Sophie comes with me. Sometimes my grandchildren come too. We bring flowers and we tell stories about Mr. Chen and Mrs. Kowalski and Mr. Morrison. We make sure they're remembered not as victims of my neglect, but as people who deserved better, who deserved the truth. Because in the end, that's what this is all about. Truth, justice, and the courage to speak up, even when it takes 7 years to find your voice.